Good evening again. Welcome and thank you very much for attending this Jewish Heritage Heart talk. It's a real pleasure for me to be the moderator of a roundtable that has exceptional participants and that guarantees a very revealing debate on key aspects for understanding Jewish heritage in Europe today, with very complementary visions referring to management, promotion, development, learning and analyzing the past, but with an eye on the present and the future. This session is part of the program of the online Root Incubator that has been held between Tuesday and Wednesday. This program is designed to offer training, workshops, and assistance to actors who develop projects in the form of Jewish heritage roots. We opened a series of very interesting discussions in 2 intense days where we have had the opportunity to reflect on a variety of issues, including digitalization, cultural tourism, education, or strategic planning of regional and transnational projects. During the incubator, we have had the opportunity to have different experts, collaborators, project leaders, as well as very special guests. For example, Libby Lanzner, Fellow of the World Monument Fund Jewish Heritage Program. I will like to give her the floor before these sessions begin, since the watch nominations are open, and what better way to explain it that with Libby herself. So Libby, good evening, good morning for you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The floor is yours, Libby.
Thank you so much. So what I'm going to be talking about a little bit very quickly is that for those who aren't aware right now, the Watch nominations are open. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the World Monuments Watch, it's a biannual program where we have different nominators come to us with sites. We have a total of 25 sites. You may know that in the past, we used to have 100 endangered sites, but since then we've kind of narrowed it down so that we are active partners and actively engaging, because in the past, sometimes we would just have a site on there for advocacy purposes, and that was enough just to have it on the watch list. But now we are only kind of actively involved with partners in all the projects that we do. So it's really the main way where we identify partners and also need. So sites that are really in need of, sorry, one second. Sorry about that. My bathroom's right. And so this is open until March 1st. I know that our name is World Monuments Fund, and that leads people to believe that we only want really magnificent monuments, which is not the case. And in the Jewish Heritage Program, it's certainly not the case either. We have really different variety of sites, and I'm gonna leave the link for nominations here, since we've been talking about a lot of great sites, and I know you have a lot of great ideas. And my email, so if you have any questions, just to follow up with me at my email, and to set up a meeting if you have anything in mind. We have the guidelines in 8 different languages, so I hope that will help some of you. And if you have any questions, please follow up with me personally. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Libby. We've been talking with Libby, and in the framework of the APJ networking sessions, we will present this program in more detail. So stay tuned. Thank you again, Libby. Going back to our session, it's in fact the closing of the incubator program, and I really can't imagine a better closing than this one. The 4 participants that make up the roundtable are clear reference in the field of European Jewish heritage because of their experience, because of their role, and in my opinion, especially because of their vision. Personally, all 4 are a source of inspiration, and listening to them is a learning experience like no other. So let me introduce you to Elise Lieberman, Director of the Taube Center for the Renewal of Jewish Life in Poland Foundation. Good evening, Elise. The microphone, Elise.
Thank you, Victor. Welcome all. I'm delighted and honored to be here.
Thank you, Elise. We have also Jeremy Lee, teacher of Israel Studies and Modern Jewish History at the Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, also member of the scientific committee. He has designed, in fact, the incubator program and has been mentoring Jewish Heritage projects for 2 days. Hi, Jeremy. Good evening. I cannot hear. Jeremy, are you there?
Hi, sorry. Hi, thank you. I'm here, and it's lovely to be here. And it's I want to agree, it's a fantastic way to draw together these amazing few days we've had together. So looking forward to this evening.
Thank you, Jeremy. We also have Ruth Ellen Gruber, Director of Jewish Heritage Europe, and also consultant of the European Route of Jewish Heritage project certified by the Council of Europe. Good evening, Ruth.
Hi, it's great to be here. It was an incredibly intense couple days. I don't think I've ever been on Zoom for that many hours altogether. But I'm looking forward to this evening's program, which will only be a little bit shorter. So.
Thank you, Ruth. And last but not least, we have Sally Berkovic, the CEO of the Rothschild Foundation, Hanadiv Europe, and as well as a writer. And it's a pleasure to listen to Sally, but it's also a pleasure to read her. So her blog in the Times of Israel is highly recommended. Good evening, Sally.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for including me.
Thank you, Sally. The story behind this session is curious and also, I think, beautiful. Sally Berkovic published an article around Shavuot in 2020 called "The 10 Other Commandments for the Care of Jewish Heritage," a very stimulating, thought-provoking article that, of course, raised a lot of interest. And not only that, it was published at a time when the foundations of many Jewish heritage projects were shaky. Together with Elise and Ruth, with whom I have the pleasure of collaborating very closely, the idea emerged to use the article as a basis for promoting a debate and discussions that can be continued over time. Thus, at the last JDCA-CJC online conference, we held a roundtable discussion with Michael Mail with some very interesting results. Not only was there very good feedback from the audience, but it was a very rich experience for us. So we are willing to continue this format, adding new profiles to the conversation. And today it's a luxury to have Jeremy Lee and the same Sally Berkovic on the panel. The session is structured as follows. Sally will start with an introduction to her article. Then each participant will have about 5 minutes to analyze and elaborate on one or various of Sally's points/commands, and then we'll open the discussion. For a better viewing experience, we recommend you that you keep the microphone off using the speaker's view. And finally, I encourage you to use also the chat to write questions and comments throughout the session. We count on you and your participation. And I would also like to thank you all for joining us here today. And having said that, I think it's time to start. Sally, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Victor. Thank you, Victor, and good evening, everybody. Perhaps the starting point for my introduction in command would be a sentence from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and to honor his memory. He said, "The single most important challenge facing the Jewish people in Israel and the diaspora is to recover the Jewish story." And I think that all of us here tonight, in learning about, understanding and sharing Jewish history and culture, are helping to uncover and then recover this Jewish story. Now, these 10 commandments give us a bit of a framework, and I look forward very much to hearing from my colleagues around the table about their responses to the commandments. And Victor asked me to introduce them a little bit. So I thought I would give you some context for how they evolved. And there were two contributing factors. Firstly, the actual holiday of Shavuot, or Pentecost as it's known in English, and that was approaching, and I was thinking about it. Now, for those of you who attend the synagogue, you'll know that we read the 10 commandments during the Torah reading. But there is also another tradition that's perhaps less well known, and that is to stay up the night of Shavuot and study the Torah. And this is called a Tikkun Leil Shavuot. And it's generally the preserve of the Orthodox community. But what's happened in recent years is that this tradition has been adapted, interpreted by various groups, and new ways of having a Tikkun Leil have emerged. For example, people have gathered at a museum to study, or discussion groups have gathered in people's homes to focus on Jewish topics. And this is another way to engage Jews in their heritage. And so I was imagining what would be a different set of commandments, and how would they complement the existing commandments and perhaps be an effective way to engage more people in thinking about Jewish ritual and identity. So I'm actually delighted to see that this alternative set of commandments has sparked some further conversation. And the second contributing factor was that I was actually inspired by the text of the Torah itself, in which we actually have two sets of commandments, basically the same, but with a few well-known textual variations. And I just want to focus on the verse about Shabbat, the Sabbath. In one set of commandments, it says to Zachor et HaShabbat, to remember the Sabbath. And in another version, it says Shamor et HaShabbat, to keep the Sabbath. The first, to remember, is about how we verbally bless the Sabbath, saying Kiddush, for example, the prayer over the wine. And the second, to keep, is to refrain from doing forbidden work. So when I thought about the heritage commandments, I split them between man and place. And I talked about that in the article for those who've read the piece. And I mentioned that the word makom, place, is also another word for God. So between man and man, I thought to myself, well, that's essentially Zachor et HaShabbat. That's about remembrance. That's telling stories, collecting memories, the work done that's related to documentation, oral histories and the like. And between place and man, that's really Shamor et HaShabbat, to refrain from what is forbidden, not to harm buildings, to protect places and ensure that cemeteries are cared for. I know that the others around the table will talk specifically about the commandments, so I'll leave them to do that. And I don't have a particularly favorite one, which may be a question that somebody will ask, but I do have conflicted feelings about some of them. And I thought I'd just mention two issues in my concluding comments. The first ambivalence I have is actually about the value of synagogue restoration. It's always a delicate balance. What's the point of restoring a synagogue when there is no Jewish community? How do we go about an effective allocation of resources to support these sorts of projects? And whose responsibilities should they be? And I'm sure many of you have very strong views about this, but it's something I am ambivalent about. And the other is about Holocaust tourism. I'm concerned, ambivalent, I keep using that word because I think it sums up so much of the way I'm thinking about these things, about the whole business of visiting the death camps, even though I know that there are those around the table who specialize in it. I'm sure it's about how it's done, who the teachers are, who the tour leaders are, what sort of preparation has gone on before the actual visit. And at the same time, we know that there is tremendous ignorance about that period, and it speaks to a bigger issue of the Holocaust being instrumentalized for wider political agendas. And I don't certainly want to get into that now, but it's something that concerns me, as I'm sure it concerns many here tonight. So in conclusion, I'm really just looking forward to hearing about how my colleagues are able to draw on the commandments. I'm delighted to have been asked to make these introductory comments. And I hope that the heritage field can use these commandments as a starting point, continue to use them as a starting point for a much wider conversation. So let me hand it back to Victor to take us around the table. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you for your words and for encouraging the debate and discussion. I think in a very original way, you have presented key aspects for the reflection on Jewish heritage. We have shared the article in the chat for those of you who have not read it yet, very recommended. And we are going to start our first round on interventions with Ruth Gruber. So Ruth, the floor is yours.
Hello, thanks, Victor. And thanks, Sally. I was planning to talk about reactions to the first commandment, thou shalt not treat every old derelict synagogue as sacrosanct. And then a couple others. Number 5, thou shalt ensure appropriate, sensitive, and multilingual signage. And maybe 10, thou shalt acknowledge and support the selfless individuals caring for Jewish heritage. But I'd like to sort of take off on Sally's ambivalence because I think this is contained in Commandment 1 and 5. Some years back, I would say, if I count correctly, 27 years back, 1994, I published a book called Upon the Doorposts of Thy House, Jewish Life in East Central Europe, Yesterday and Today. And I called it that because I drew on the concept of the mezuzah, which is placed, you know, the prayer that's placed on the doorpost of Jewish homes to designate these homes as Jewish. My sort of conceit that I used in this book was that after the Holocaust, in many places over Europe, you saw the scars of where these mezuzot were. These denoted places where Jews once lived. And then you could extrapolate from that the physical remains, even the ruined synagogues, the abandoned cemeteries, places like that, the physical remains, the physical traces. These also were mezuzah or symbolic mezuzah because they denoted towns, villages, cities, countries, all sorts of places where Jews once lived and for the most part did not live anymore in a great part of Europe. And so I think this is the value, one of the values, let's say, of the surviving Jewish heritage in Europe today. Many of these places, they are survivors as much as human Holocaust survivors, and they tell stories and they tell histories. I agree very much with Sally that not every old derelict synagogue is sacrosanct. I don't think every synagogue building needs to be saved. According to the database of historic synagogues in Europe, which was drawn up and researched by the Center for Jewish Art, commissioned by the Foundation for Jewish Heritage in London, there's something like 3,000 and some synagogues that still stand in Europe. And there's a large percentage of these which are in very bad condition or ruined, and a very large percentage which are transformed into other uses. Some of them are transformed out of recognition. I believe that many of them are worth saving. Many of them have been saved. They're saved for many reasons. The architectural value, the memorial value, the fact that they tell the story, they designate places, they are survivors, and these symbolic mezuzot that show that Jews once lived in these places, once had often glorious societies in these places, built beautiful buildings. And these, I think, need to be protected, need to be saved, and their stories need to be told. And that's why, to go to number 5, I believe very strongly in appropriate, sensitive, and multilingual signage to designate these places, even if they no longer serve as synagogues. Many restored synagogues are used for cultural purposes, and it's sort of easy to put plaques there. But many synagogues serve what we can almost call inappropriate purposes now. They're bars, they're cafes, they're restaurants, there's a swimming pool, fire stations, whatever. Some are so transformed and degraded that you don't even see any trace of what they were. But signage should be placed there to tell what they were. I mentioned during the incubator, and I'll stop just with this, that in the town of Chełm in southeastern Poland, the surviving synagogue there is today a Western style saloon on the ground floor and an upscale restaurant on the top floor. You can still see, however, the plaques of the 10 Commandments up in the eaves. And on the side of the building, there is a plaque that denotes what it is. There could be more. There's a QR code, which apparently didn't work when I was there, but there's a QR code. And if it worked, you would be able to point your phone there and find lots more information. But at least the synagogue was marked for what it was. And through this, you get at least a little sense of the history and memory. So I'll stop there, and I'll just add that in addition to signage, I believe that there should be, you know, technical signage too, QR codes, apps, all sorts of other things that can also encourage engagement with these places, and also teach about them and put them in their places, put them in their place in the history and the landscape and the cityscape of where they are standing and where they have stood. So I'll stop there and go on to the next.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And actually, I think that they are very, very good points. I'm sure that we are going to continue talking about them during the roundtable. Now we are going to continue with Jeremy. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi. I'm going to focus actually on very specifically on number 9, which is one which, first of all, I have to thank Sally for a fantastic article, and not just because of the content that it offers, but maybe in the spirit of number 9, that it's a great launch pad for education, which is the world that I work in. The tying together of education with heritage is not a straightforward one, because in a way, heritage sites have, at least outwardly, a static status. They are unmoving. They are stones, or they are plastic objects. They're physically there. And in the world of education, we're about moving things. We're about opening things up, playing around with them, and engaging in conversations. And so the conscious desire to draw these two things together in a way I think, gives respect both to what the sites at least offer, having survived the transition from past to present, to how we are now. But of course, what it does is it opens up, or it begs a kind of an acknowledgement that who has the greater voice, who has the greater, not the veto, but what is the balance of who has which rights? Is it the static nature of the building, or is it actually us in the present as we come to have conversations in and around and with the sites? And at what point is the site really actually only becoming really a backdrop? And at what point does it have its own status on its own? I am going to push it a little bit further, because you name, I think for me, I mean, this is sort of my life's work, as it were, the work that I choose to kind of spend my life in, which is in the field of contemporary Jewish education. In saying that, and I think certainly given the knowledge of the way that sites operate, of course, not everyone who's interacting with Jewish heritage sites is Jewish, although you name it and I understand the context in which you're saying it. So my comments in a way are a little bit tilted towards specifically Jewish education, but I think there's a resonance elsewhere. For me, I think one of the big challenges of education in the world that we live, the contemporary Jewish educational landscape as you describe it, is finding a way in which a generation of people who, I guess, I don't know what the right phrase would be, but younger than myself, let's put it that way, I'm 55. But how a younger and emerging generation feel comfortable, I think, understanding that they're part of something bigger than the Jewish world that they live in. In other words, the challenge of Jewish heritage sites, or the challenge of Jewish education, to help people locate themselves in a world that is bigger than them. Now, this leads us to lots of other things which almost become cliches. The past as a foreign country, or the past as this kind of universal landscape, but it's one in which people struggle to identify with. So in a way, my desire to kind of activate number 9 is to say that heritage is an invitation for us to enter into this amazing world of the past, which with all of its tragedy and all of its glory, but knowing that it's there for us to be able to connect with, and to give people a sense that the past is tangible. Now, of course, the way it becomes tangible is the role and the responsibility of the educator, and that is, that's a whole other field. Well, it's not a whole other field; it's a whole other workshop, or it's a whole other kind of course. So, just maybe a couple of very brief things which for me that go with it. One is to emphasize something which I also think is missing in the field of contemporary Jewish education, which is that we go into education in order to recreate ourselves, or rather the educator seeks to educate along what they currently have. That's the politics of whether we are kind of opening doors or we're kind of shutting doors, or we're telling people this is what you must look at. where's the voice of the student in there as well? Now, why am I saying it? Because one of the great needs, and I think it's in the world as a whole, it's certainly there in the world of Jewish education. You know, I live in Israel, I live in Jerusalem. Pluralism and diversity are values and strategies and practices which can be bent too far, but we are in dire need of them. So the reason I'm flagging it up or bringing it up is to say this. When I go into the world of the past that is represented by these heritage sites, first of all, I realize I'm a much smaller person than I thought I was, and I need the modesty to know that I'm in the presence of all this past and all the things that it represents. But more than that, and this is really taking us towards diversity, is that I realize that my Jewishness is only one Jewishness. There may be a debate that we can have about dogma or truth or law or fundamentals of what Jewishness is, and I'm a big fan of the conversation. But I think on lots of levels, I mean, the easiest one I think is to talk about sub-ethnic identity. I take groups to visit sites, and Ashkenazim going to Sephardi sites, Sephardim going to Ashkenazi sites, going to sites that don't belong to Ashkenazi or Sephardi, or are just too complicated to be able to work out. That is a way of honoring and celebrating the incredible richness and the rainbow that is the Jewish people. And I think, by the way, even in the same way, I mean, I said about taking Jewish people, Jewish students to places which are not Jewish sites. Yes, the whole world is not Jewish. Who knew? But vice versa. Just keeping an eye on the kind of, I suppose, the time, maybe just to sort of push towards one other key element here, and that is acknowledging that we are taking people to places and we're saying this represents this edifice of Jewish peoplehood, of Jewish diversity, of Jewish history, but that still doesn't get us to the last point, which is the one that I wanted to stress as well, which is where the dialogue happens, where education is a conversation and the heritage site gives us an opportunity to really engage with it. I'm going to be very specific and sort of name for me one of my all-time favorite locations, although there are a number of them that we could do. But in 1906 and then again in 1907, the Tsar of Russia kind of granted or allowed Jews to participate, or allowed people to participate in an election for the Russian parliament. It wasn't a particularly successful parliament and it didn't go very far. But there is a place just off Gediminas Prospect in Vilna, or Vilnius, in Vilna, where the Jews of Vilna, which we know specifically, came together to debate who they would be voting for in the forthcoming election. Why am I choosing it as a favorite site? Because it's a site that celebrates, that sort of invites you in almost to be able to talk about that site. What was the future that Jews were arguing about then, and that by definition or by extension we might be fighting for or discussing now? Was it Zionism in its 57 different varieties? Was it Bundism or Jewish communism? Was it autonomism? Was it ultra-Orthodoxy? Real debates that happened at a different place at a different time, but the echoes are very resonant with us today. In other words, a heritage site that invites us in to see, the arguments of what we have today are not the first time we've ever had them. But by engaging in those conversations, of course, we are reflecting it back onto ourselves. So for me, in the way of summing it up, it's to say that education is this kind of opportunity to expand ourselves, to feel ourselves part of something. And I suppose the piece I'm leaving open there is the piece that I said at the beginning, which is, so what is the tension? What's the balance between where the heritage site has a right to have its voice as it is, or whether the educator has the right to kind of stretch it, to bend it, to shine the light in a particular way so that it casts shadows in a certain particular way, or that we see the light refracted in a certain kind of way. Because for me, I think that is the place where something happens, which I think all of us on this are kind of hoping will always happen. That when we go somewhere and we engage in participating or in educating, there is something, that emotive, irrational moment of creativity or imagination that makes us feel alive, makes us feel human, makes us feel that we have purpose, And that is an amazing thing. And that, I think, for me, is where what education aspires to. And I think heritage is that way that leads us into it. So I'm going to pause it there because I know I want to hear from everybody else, and we'll have time to chat a little bit later on.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I think that you pointed out also not just very crucial aspects, but a certain perspective on how we work with Jewish heritage sites. No, I like very much this idea of understanding heritage sites as a kind of laboratory when past, present, and future they interact between among them. No, we are going to. Thanks for that. I think that we are going to tackle this issue on our conversation. But first, we have Elise Lieberman. So, Elise, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I am in the both enviable and unenviable position of following Sally, Ruth, and Jeremy. I've taken notes, and I made notes in preparation for what I wanted to share. I can't read those notes, so you'll get the real me front and center. So I thought there are several commandments. First of all, Sally, thank you for making this an incredible Jewish source. I think I know exactly how it will be put to work in a program that I would like to talk about at the very end. I would like to suggest that each of these are addressed in future conversations at this roundtable, which I hope will continue throughout the year in different places and with different faces. I would like to come back to number 6, because I think you know, Sally, that this is one piece where I believe we very much have to focus our energy in terms of how is the Holocaust taught, but how are the camps and sites, particularly in Poland and Eastern Europe, used, misused, or I'm sorry to say, abused. So I put that out there. So thank you. I've been lucky and in my life to be an educator with different hats. I've been an informal youth group educator, a Hillel director. I was the director of a Jewish day school. And in between my position now is the Toby Center. Also, I did some consultations with different organizations. And I've had the opportunity to really think about more and more, what is heritage? What is it? And if you don't mind, I'd like to say the following. I think that, first of all, for me, heritage is a kind of a nexus between the concept of morasha, that what we inherit, and the Yerusha, that what we as a people leave. And when we divide them very strictly and don't create this space to, as Jeremy says, engage, or Ruth has talked about, how do we acknowledge, and shamor, to keep, and zahor, to remember, we're losing an opportunity, which I believe is detrimental to us, I mean, to the world, but certainly to the Jewish community of the world, in the sense that let's try to make heritage a verb, to heritage. I'm thinking about heritage as an act, a positive act, a not passive act of transmission. It is going from one place, one space, one time, one person to another. And it's an active decision to engage or to engage others. And I believe that heritage should be the sort of center of all Jewish education. You can call it, you can attribute it, you can name it, you can use it in different ways. It comes out informal, experiential. It comes out at camp, it comes out in the yeshiva, it comes out in front of a monument, it comes out as you walk by the way. It's absolutely everywhere. And I think, and I'm sorry to say, because I know so many people on the call cherish what heritage really is, and certainly means some different things to some of us, but in a sense, we need to unpack the word for those who are somewhat, I would say, drawn away from it. Heritage is something in my aunt's closet, something that happened 100 years ago in a country, as you mentioned, maybe far away, or even in my backyard here in Poland. And if we make it a current phrase and we make it the exchange, I would say the transition, the sort of the monetary, not monetary, but sort of that is which is the center of the kinds of education we would like to achieve, I think we find a common bond. It goes beyond history, it goes beyond sites, it goes beyond histories and stories and narratives. And so in order to do this, we have to educate the educators. I think that we're all doing it, and I chapeau bas to all of you on this call and all of you who are not, who do it in so many different ways. But I think that in terms of creating this nexus, this space between Morasha and Yerusha, between informal and formal, I think heritage has a role that can bring them both together. So I think one point is how to educate the educators. Two is how to bring the Jewish communal leaders and organizations into the field to understand that it's a priority. However they define it within their own community parameters, heritage, the preservation, promotion, understanding of, appreciation for is critical. How do we understand the third space? I was privileged to be part of a conversation last night about the coffee house as a third space. And there are many spaces that I'm just beginning to recognize as really transformative, transitional spaces for heritage. I'm a coffee drinker, as you heard from Chuck. I think many of us are. It's a topic of many of my personal conversations, but I realize how much we share in a coffee house that is basically rooted in the heritage we want to share with whomever we're speaking or with a group. The other piece I've been thinking a lot about is within our own community, but also how do we share out? I think that as much as we're lacking knowledge about our own heritage, our own roots, our own traditions, our own stories, both the positive and the negative, as Jeremy pointed out, the rich and also the traumatic. That's one thing. It's like looking in, and how do we look out? And we've been inspired, the Toby Center has been inspired and is grateful to be able to work with the AEPJ and the Union of Italian Jewish Communities on a very special project. Jeremy, I think you will remember, you were at the birthing of this project, Midor Lador, which prepares those Jewish educators in different fields, museums and in schools and camps and guides and so forth, to really become their stewards of Jewish heritage, and to value that in terms of using models that exist, creating models which are appropriate. I see that really using education as a pathway, as a tool, is critical to how we in our generations and those generations to come understand that they are part of heritage. Heritage is theirs, and we are it, and it is ours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you so much. That was a very generous invitation and a very important statement, in my opinion. To close this first round, I would like to quickly comment on the commandment number 4, that it's related to traveling to the Jewish world and the cultural tourism offer. No? And in my opinion, Sally here puts focus in a very important topic in this commandment number 4, not only for the moment in which we are living in relation to the COVID, but also for the change of perspective in relation to the offer of cultural tourism that we are living in the heritage sites in Europe today, and not only Jewish heritage sites. We have been talking for 2 days during this incubator about the need not only to reinvent ourselves, but concepts such as co-creation, sustainability, transforming the offer into experiences where the visitor, whether local or from abroad, becomes an active actor, have gone from ideas to needs. The teams working in the field of cultural tourism have a key educational character. I think that both Elise and Jeremy, they were insisting in this aspect. And this is beginning to be an obligation, not only for the survival of those institutions that base a large part of their income on the cultural tourism offer, but also for the development of their full potential of the work that connects heritage and tourism. In my opinion, from what we heard at the incubator these days, there is a real paradigm shift, and it is possible to do things well. We need to understand the tourism industry as a driver force for social development and cultural diplomacy. And for that, we need to understand too that cultural tourism requires a complex vision and a full understanding of all the potential and consequences of tourism, because we are talking about a social impact, and we talk about responsibility, authenticity, accessibility, and inclusivity are factors that must be present at all times when we work in this area in planning and in the planning phase and in the implementation phase as well, because the goal is to have the ability to create channels for intercultural dialogue and promoting better knowledge and understanding of European history and the Jewish history, creating awareness of cultural diversity. And we have in our hands a great tool to be able to, but we need to be able to establish a balance between the preservation of the specific nature of Jewish heritage and the necessity to make it accessible to visitors and tourism. We have also talked these 2 days very intensively about technology. And I think the conclusion we have reached is that the new technologies are a key instrument, especially nowadays, but they are not the main goal. It's not all about resources when we talk about the experiences in Jewish heritage sites. We need to understand the role of technology within a strategy as well. No? I just wanted to share with you these small reflections. It's after 2 days. It's been going around in my head all the time during the different sessions of the incubator. And having said that, we close this first round of interventions, and we open the debate. So now I would like to ask if there's anyone of the participants, Sally, Ruth, Jeremy, Elise, that want to comment on each other. Also, I invite all the participants to write questions and comments in the chat, and we are going to share it with all. So time for the debate. If not, I have a, yeah, well, okay. I was preparing some questions, but I say that maybe it's not going to be necessary. So maybe Elise, would you like to start?
Thank you. May I respond to my own comment for a second? And I apologize, but I realize that so listening intently and thinking intently, and well, I'm sorry that I wasn't at the incubator. As the director of a educational heritage tour program, it's another hat that I wear. So Victor, I'm very glad you brought in number 4. And once again, you know, this is that space. I don't want to say that the bus is the third space, but creating that kind of opportunity for dialogue, especially among narratives. I think many of us, and maybe I speak for us on the eastern side of Europe now, but we find ourselves not just outside of facts and contextualization and history, we find ourselves with people who are coming with different expectations, assumptions, perhaps stereotypes, and therefore this concept of having this space of tour is our third space where people can actually put those assumptions to the test, and where the spaces and people that they meet, which are essential to any visit in terms of both contemporary and historical, makes it possible for people to really begin to grapple with our heritage and our historical narratives. So thank you for allowing me to comment on my.
Oh, no, thanks to you. Thanks to you. Jeremy, I saw that you were raising your hand.
Actually, it's really as a question to Sally, or really to kind of to put something to you, which is a challenge which has been running. It's a personal challenge, and it's been a challenge specifically, I will say, coming from the world of Jewish education, but in the environment of Jewish heritage development and so on, and certainly with the Roots project that we've been looking at during the incubator. The question of, I'm going to the one that I chose, number 9, in the field of Jewish education. And I suppose my question is in terms, let me be, maybe I should phrase it by being a bit sharper about where this is coming from. I had a conversation with someone in the course of the last few days, which is, someone said, what is the voice when we write our heritage roots? What is the voice? Are we talking to Jews, to non-Jews, or to everybody? That's the bit, sorry, that's what all that fumbling around was getting to. And, it's very comfortable because the audience that one is with can, sets the terms for the educator. But when we draw back and we look at planning of heritage and we look at writing of materials that are there for everybody to use, how much do you think there is a kind of a need to kind of emphasize, as it were, an authentic Jewish voice speaking to Jews within themselves, and how much is it we're trying to kind of use this as cultural diplomacy? Sorry, that was a long-winded way of trying to get to what I was trying to say.
I can only give a long-winded answer. I'm not quite sure myself. It's a tricky one because, and it'll depend, the Jewish community is very, very small. There are more visitors, more non-Jewish visitors to Jewish sites than Jews in terms of the numbers ultimately. There'll be some places where Jewish people will go to but in general, I would have thought the numbers are far greater of non-Jewish people. And I think we need to create a welcoming environment for non-Jewish people to understand what is missing, what was lost. So in terms of Ruth's issues around signage and what is the purpose of those buildings. In terms of the education, it depends. Look, it's going to depend who your audience is. Taking a group of kids from Jewish youth movements through Europe is very different to taking a group of priests and imams to Auschwitz. So you have to tailor it to your group, obviously. I think we at the foundation are mindful that we want to make it a more, we don't see it as cultural. This cultural diplomacy notion has sort of almost an ulterior motive innuendo, which I understand it, but that's not our motivation at the foundation. The motivations are about the preservation, the allowing people to understand the heritage of a place, and non-Jewish people need to understand what lost and that it's a part of their heritage education as well. It's not just Jewish heritage education, it's their own heritage education. But I think Ruth wants to say something to get me out of it.
No, thank you.
You have to unmute, Ruth.
Yes, Ruth, please. Yeah.
I muted out of politeness so the dog wouldn't bark while I'm talking, while I'm listening.
No, this is working well, Ruth, no worries.
Okay. No, the dog is not barking right now, but at one Zoom thing that I did, she barked the entire time and it was a little embarrassing. Thinking back on the last 2 days with the incubator and thinking about tourism, one word that I don't think I heard at all, but I heard constantly when I was in the United States and was dealing with some sort of tourism issues, is interpretation and interpreters. I taught at the College of Charleston in South Carolina, and I did some work on African-American tourism in the Charleston area in South Carolina. And I found, so I met a lot of interpreters. People are not called guides, they're interpreters. And there's the interpretation of the history, interpretation of the story. And this is something that I think, Sally, both Jeremy and Sally were beginning to talk, the interpretation. Who is interpreting the story and to whom is the story being interpreted? And I know I wrote about this years ago because in Germany, in the 90s, there's a tremendous number of Jewish museums in Germany. Many of them were created by non-Jews for a non-Jewish audience. The Krakow Jewish Festival was created by non-Jews for a generally non-Jewish audience. There's more Jewish participation and more Jews in the audience now, but back in 1988, it was non-Jews performing and presenting Jewish culture, interpreting Jewish culture, Jewish heritage for a non-Jewish audience. It's, but there are many channels for interpretation. But here in Europe, I haven't heard the term interpreter. It's used guide. And I just will, an anecdote. I mean, I have led Jewish groups around Europe. And I, as part of the research and work I was doing in South Carolina, I went on a couple African-American heritage tours in Charleston. And on one of them, I was the only white person on the tour bus. And the rest of the tourists were basically out of town, African-American, I would say, you know, middle-class people going on this tour bus with a very, very good guide to see these sites of African-American heritage in the Charleston area. A lot of sites which white tour groups or mainstream tour groups would not go see. And I was really impressed by the interpreter. He drove the bus, so he was speaking and driving at the same time, because he was speaking to that group of African-American tourists who are coming to see their heritage, basically, even if it was slave heritage, difficult heritage. He was speaking to them from an in-group, the same way that I would speak to a Jewish group going to see heritage sites in Europe. I mean, when I would say something about, you know, your bubby and your chicken soup and, you know, throw in a little bit of Yiddish or some sort of story, he did the same thing about rice and the people reacted in the same way. And I was the outsider in that group because I didn't share these common connects. So he was interpreting from an insider's view to inside. And when I was taking Jewish groups around, this is, if I were taking non-Jewish groups around, which I have also done, or individuals, I mean, I would interpret a different way. I would not be talking inside to inside. So it's these types of things that I did not hear that term interpret or interpreter in the 2 days that I followed the incubator. But I think it's an important idea. And, you know, maybe it's very American, but I think it's rather than guiding, there is interpretation, because you can't guide without interpreting.
The question
one way
is
or another.
What sort of interpreting you're doing. Oh, sorry, yeah. I should have raised my hand. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very small comment really to come in behind it, which is, first of all, thank you both for the comments you make, and I love the idea of the interpreter. The reason for flagging it up is keeping it close to the work that we've done in the last couple of days and the enormous amount of work we've got going forward in developing these routes. I hear absolutely what you're saying, and what you said just now, Ruth, about, you know, the group, the insidership is a warm and comfortable place, and that's, you know, in a way, and it makes sense, and those cultural references and the terminology, it's understood. By the way, lots of Jewish groups, as you well know, absolutely not always understood, but that's part of the challenge of education. I think the challenge comes if you put it into signage, if you put it into to the materials that we, you know, the voice, who is the voice of the routes that we're putting on, you know, that are carrying the APJ project and that are approved by the Council of Europe. You know, there's a parallel Council of Europe trip called the Viking route. There aren't that many Vikings who are going to be speaking, but I understand everything comes within its own boundaries, and it's a dilemma. In other words, I'm saying it coming from the comfortable in the inside of it, fascinated by how we interpret this in a democratic and meaningful way without surrendering. I also, by the way, Sally, in terms of this question of cultural diplomacy as a term that we use, you know, my worry, I think, is that we lose our specificity and we lose ourselves in a universalism that is comfortable for everybody, but actually in the end, it just becomes colonial because we lose ourselves. Anyway, I
think that's an interesting point, actually. Yeah, too eager to please everybody, we're the ones who lose out.
Yeah, but also to be decent, you know, in other words, how to do it as a mention, how to be open, and so on.
And also to give due recognition to the huge number of non-Jewish people who are stewarding Jewish heritage.
Oh my goodness!
I mean,
absolutely.
That's extraordinary. And
number 10.
What what, you know, I really feel that strongly. And what are we doing to help educate them, actually, because they are interpreting, guiding, whatever they're doing. But some of them will be very knowledgeable, but some of them I suspect are good-hearted people who actually don't know very much and haven't had the opportunity to learn very much about, they may know their specific site, but they may not know very much or about Jewish culture or Jewish, whatever it is. So what do we do? That's another element of Jewish education, really, for those stewards.
Absolutely. Sorry. Go, Ruth, please.
I was just going to say, Helisa's run programs teaching people how to,
sure,
you know, how to guide or interpret whatever you want to say, and you know, there are some programs that go deeper into this, but you can hear, you know, if you listen to some of these people going around and their tours, some of them are really good, some of them are really not good.
Sure.
And I think that the place where they're least good is in the place where there's the most mass tourism, because it just becomes around.
No, absolutely, Ruth. And I wanted to comment on what you were saying about interpretation, because I think that it's also interesting to be aware that the interpretation of heritage is something very trendy in the field of the heritage management. No? For example, in the Council of Europe, it's something that you are going to hear all the time. No? I think in our case, it's a bit more complicated. I'm not saying, I'm not disrespectful with the Vikings, but the interpretation of the Jewish heritage, I think it needs to having a more complex vision and understanding in order to make it accessible to all. Because the Jewish heritage, as you were saying, and as it was mentioned here, it's talking about Europe. It's also a European heritage. It needs to be accessible for non-Jews because it's also their story. How to make it accessible? I think that's the great challenge. And I'm going to pass the word to Elise, because I think that here the key is education. Education to the guides, education to the teams that are working in this field. So Elise.
Sure, thank you. And Ruth, thank you for your comment. I believe, and to follow Sally as well, this educational process, whether it's we have a program Midor Lador for generation to generation, which started here in Poland and will be available in Europe, first in Italy, is one format where the focus is of, as I say, people from different places, different institutions, different métiers, to come together to really explore what it means for them as heritage, how they educate, how they use it, etc. And of course, our tours. And I would add one piece, and Sally, thank you for bringing up number 10. I think all of us on this call really believe that too little honor or kavod is given to those people who are not Jewish, but have taken it upon themselves to take care of a Jewish heritage site, try to meet with people. They are the keepers of the key to the cemetery that they're cleaning, or the synagogue that you really can't see, in addition to being voices of diversity and a sense of national pride in national memory, that it's our memory and it's not just their problem or their issue, it's our responsibility and it's our obligation. And just very quickly, we're running a program whereby Jewish text is the common denominator. And this is now for Jews and non-Jews in organizations in Poland. And I'm struck by the fact that many people, Sally, as you said, are very deeply involved and committed to what they're doing and may have pieces, just like Jews, of our culture and our tradition. But when you bring it back to the text or a common denominator, then you suddenly realize that it opens up all sorts of opportunities for really understanding what we mean by heritage and how deep that it goes. So I agree. Education through tourism, through conversation, through guiding, interpreting. I'd love to come back to that because I'm like Jeremy, I'm sorry, just quite not sure if that's it, but it's something to think about. Any kind of informal, experiential, getting your hands dirty and cleaning a cemetery, meeting people in the field who've chosen to take care of heritage sites or share them. There's a lot to do. I'm looking forward to doing with all of you.
Thank you, Elise. I'm going to read one comment on the chat from Danny Rothschild from Mallorca. He says, I think that some of the most potent moments on tours of Jewish heritage is when there's a mix of Jewish and non-Jews that can learn about Babel and chicken soup from the other Jewish participants on the tour.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, Danny is an expert, so I think he does it brilliantly. And it's an interesting question. I mean, I suppose then, sorry, I just barged in there. I want to comment on it because it's interesting. I mean, it becomes part of the analysis of tourism, and again, we already have this, very interesting phrasing that Ruth brought us, which is of the interpreter. But then, of course, then it acknowledges that there is the site and all that lies behind it. And then there is the interpreter or the guide, and then there is the group, and then the question is how the interactions take place, and that of course is fascinating. And I think by flagging up what Danny says, that then of course the group provides its own energy. The thing that I think is for me is it's fascinating is, and I appreciate absolutely what was just said about when it's a hell of a responsibility for someone who's not Jewish to take on the responsibility of telling a story about somebody else, in the same way that it'll be the responsibility of me to tell the story of any version, something which is not mine. For me, the tricky part, I think, still comes when we try and work out what the nuances and the balances are. And actually, the thing that I wanted to say, and it's really picking up from Danny, which is it works for him because he's a member of the Jewish community. And it's really a way of connecting to, I think, one of the ones which is there in Sally's, in your article, in your commandments. But one thing which I just want to make sure it gets absolutely said, which is that in this field, the voice of the local Jewish community is probably worth more than anything else. And it's the one which is the hardest one to curate. And it's the one which, by the way, lots of Jewish groups struggle with, particularly in places where they don't want to find a voice. But that's changing. Because it's the one where it's much more clunky. It's a lot more unmanageable. The weird Jewish guy or woman who lives in this place, and they have the voice, but they have a voice. And for me, that's one of the pieces which is very hard to know how to curate, how to put it into the program, how to put it into the route. But I just wanted to make sure that it gets said, because it's the bit that we can often get lost on.
Can I just add to that or complement it in terms of Danny's comment and just yours? Now, what's the purpose of the tour, and who is the tour? It goes back to who is the tour for, and who's the story being created for. If the tour is to consolidate Jewish identity and create a very particularistic notion of one's identity and sort of create boundaries, then that's a very different educator. It's a very different story that's going to be told than one that is designed to be, just as it happens on that day, there's a group of people that meet, it doesn't matter whether Jewish, not Jewish, whoever they are, they're just meeting and they're going on a day trip and finish. So I think that's also part of it. It's, what's your end goal? What are you looking for? And for some groups, they definitely won't want a mixture of people. And for some groups it's designed, and for some groups it's not even designed in any way. There's nothing conscious. It's a tour, that doesn't have a purpose like that.
Can I just say that these are amazing comments that people are putting into the chat, and I realize why you want to put them into the chat. But actually, similarly, I guess people should feel free to speak up and get them so we can actually see, because Danny, you probably said what you said. It would sound nicer if hearing it with your dulcet tones.
Absolutely, absolutely. Also, my English accent, it's pretty bad. So, for example, there's a comment of Pippa Shirley. Pippa, would you like to unmute your microphone and share your thoughts?
Yeah, if I can. Have I done that?
Absolutely. Please go for it. Sorry.
I'll put my video on as well. Hello, everybody. No, I just wanted to say that I'm completely sort of fascinated and excited really by this debate, because speaking as a non-Jewish curator of a Jewish site, Waddesdon Manor in Buckinghamshire, which, it has to be said, sort of wears its Jewishness quite lightly in lots of ways, and that's something else which, you know, we could all debate and discuss. I think the idea of education, and particularly educating our interpreters, whether they're curators or guides or interpreters or whatever we call them, is absolutely key, because otherwise how can they be comfortable in handing on this narrative for something which they may believe to belong to somebody else, essentially. And I think the only way that we can work towards having this kind of free exchange of information, which is so important in this context, is by making sure that, you know, the people on the front line are comfortable with it. And it's something that we've been working with, you know, with Jeremy, in fact, and with others, and through our project on Jewish country houses and through the route. And it's just such an important thing that we all have to think about. And we've not cracked it yet, but we're working towards it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pippa. I'm just going to add the necessity of creating these bridges nowadays, especially for the time that we are living in Europe. So absolutely, thanks for that. There's Deborah asking. Please, Deborah, go ahead. And there's also a couple of comments on the chat. So Andre and Jay, please also feel free.
I think Penina has her hand up.
And Penina also. Oh, okay, there's 46 people, so for me it's a bit difficult to track. So let's go with Deborah, Penina, and then Andre and Jay if they want to unmute their microphone. Deborah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I think the Ten Commandments it's an excellent, deeply thought-provoking approach. So Sally, thank you. Well, actually, Commandment 4, thou shalt be constantly surprised while traveling the Jewish world. So what I've said is I think working in the area where I work, which is Belarus, we need to do more to access the bigger story of the Jewish world, because there's so much of the Jewish story is immersed in the Soviet and post-Soviet narrative, and this is the work that we're doing to build our Jewish cultural heritage trail. And I would just be interested to hear how, I know that Belarus's politics is a major obstacle, so it's a big problem. But we have, Jeremy's, but the story's there and the history is there. And that's the work that we're doing, and it's very important, and we do want the world to know it. And I just would be interested to hear how the panel feels that the access to support and collaboration across borders in situations like this could be improved, because we often find that it's difficult. And, you know, what part of our role as route is, you know, in the cultural roots management from theory to practice, it's all about conversation across borders and being transnational. And that's something that we really want to be developing, but sometimes it's difficult. And I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say about that.
We are looking at you, Jeremy.
I mean, I think there's a thank you, Deborah. I mean, I mean, you named it. You know, in a way that trans-border, when the borders. I mean, there's the technicalities and the political parts which are there. They're just difficult, and in the case of Belarus, you know, that's so obvious and so evident. You know, in a way, I suppose for me, part of it actually moves to a parallel conversation, which is not actually about the heritage itself, but it's about the promotion and the marketing or the planning and the development of accessibility to get to places. And that's a way of trying to, and there is something to be said for it. In other words, by making a statement in what one does. I mean, I think all the panelists, and I think probably everyone who's on this knows that there are certain old habits that people have. They will always go to certain places. And, you know, where do North American Jews most like to go in Europe? That's a really crude way of asking it. But the place that they're not going is Georgia, for instance. Now, they might start now, or they're not going to, you know, Salonika. They might start now because people think according to what they already know. So there's a responsibility on the part of us to try and widen the, well, I don't know actually whether if that's the right metaphor, but anyway, to widen the aperture, to let more light out and let people see that this is bigger. That's one of the amazing things about the Cultural Roots project that we have. It exposes people to things they didn't know. And at that point, so some people are always looking for the next most exciting thing or the next cheapest route or the whatever else, but I think our responsibility is to shine light. I mean, this is an enormous amount of work that Ruth's done over the last decades, is to shine a light on places so that people go there. Now, the last big thing that I was going to say is, which I know, Deborah, you and I spoke about this yesterday or the day before, yesterday, which is what is the work that we can do that sort of, where there is a ton of a technical administrative thing, which is how do you organize a route that if the theme is Northern Ashkenazi kind of experience, that would lead us to cross quite a lot of borders and boundaries. But they need visas. Some of them need visas and some need to go to quasi-democracies and some take us to non-democracies or, whatever you want to say it, but they're messy and difficult things. And I think that is sort of somewhere, loosely speaking, whatever us are, whoever we are, to try and find the ways to make this as easy as possible, because in the end, we all stand to gain from it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Ruth, do you want to answer also to Deborah? The micro, Ruth.
Yeah, to answer Deborah, Belarus is a hard sell, whoever you're trying to get tourists, whatever tourism you're trying to do in Belarus, it's a hard sell. And I almost think it might be easier to organize Jewish tourism, Jewish heritage tourism in Belarus, because you have a narrative. Most of the Jews who want to go to Belarus are going to be people whose ancestors come from there.
Absolutely,
you have
absolutely.
But for Belarus, it's hard to go there, and it's not too many people go there. Not too many foreign people go there for tourism. It used to, you needed the visa. People don't know the language. They think of the political situation. But there is a market. There is a Jewish market for Belarus, which I think is helpful. It's more helpful than normal tourism to Belarus. And I think, most Jews who come to Europe don't come on Jewish heritage trips. They go to Paris, they go to London, they go to Venice, but they don't go to the ghetto. They go to the Academia, they go down the Grand Canal, they go to Florence, they don't go to the synagogue, they go to the Duomo. And there's a subset, it's a niche market for Jewish heritage tours. And, you want to, and for some people, I remember, when there are places where a lot of people go, that's one destination or one country or one city where you can probably sell a Jewish heritage tour more easily, because it's going to be an alternative. Everybody has gone and seen, the big sites in Prague, but there was Kafka's Prague, and then there's Jewish heritage in Prague is a must see, but people don't go out of Prague. I mean, this is the entire Czech tourism agent business is trying to get people to go out of Prague, because everybody goes to Prague, but nobody goes to Mikulo. Maybe they'll go to Karlovy Vary, maybe they'll go to Český Krumlov, but they don't go to Brno, which is the second largest city, which has a lot to see, Jewishly and not. And they have a wonderful Jewish tourism office that has tours and information about all of Southern Moravia, but nobody goes there. I mean, it's not just Jewish tourism. Everybody goes to Prague because that's where you go. I mean, two summers ago, my brother and I traveled all over the Czech Republic for like 2 weeks in a car. I think we heard English twice. We were all over them, and we were doing Jewish heritage tourism. We were going to all these places on the 10 Stars route and others. But it's a niche market, but it's also getting people away from the big places is a lower platform, let's say, and it can be worked on. But I think in Belarus you have the advantage because there is a market. There's the genealogy tours, and there are people who are already doing this, and their experience should be tapped into, because there is a well-developed, there's Belarus Jewish heritage genealogy tourism. But you know, it's, how many cultural roots are there, Victor? 48 or something like this. This is one of them, but it's they're all sort of alternative routes, and this is an alternative route. It's you know, something that I love doing, and is incredibly important.
Absolutely, and just to add to that, Ruth. No, sorry. No, just to add to that, that one of the goals of the Cultural Roots Project, it's especially this one, no, because as we were saying before, no, we can understand heritage as a driving force also for social and economical development. So developing routes maybe in non-capital places or mass tourism countries, it's also an opportunity. No? So Elise, and then we go with the question of Penina, and we will try to finish the conversation because I promised 1 hour and 15 minutes and we are almost 1 hour and a half. So impossible for me to cut this conversation. Sorry. Elise.
Thank you, Victor. I wanted to jump off on what Ruth was saying, and Sally, if we may, we know that 10 are the beginning 10, but I was thinking if we might want to add another one at some point, honor thy father and mother, because you're talking about genealogy. Where do I come from? Where do my roots start? And we have the privilege and honor of working with a lot of families. We go into Belarus when you can, and when you doesn't take 10 hours to cross the border, but into Lithuania, into Ukraine when it was possible. And the power of those visits by people who want to know where their family comes from, even if nothing is left, let's say, is so profound. I think it opens up for themselves, it opens up for their kids, obviously, and it also brings in a cultural dialogue with people in the place. You know, you come to a small town and someone's a guide, someone will take you into the synagogue, whether maybe you meet the members of the Jewish community, which I agree with you, Jeremy, are absolutely important parts, even if they challenge people, maybe dafka because they challenge people. We should make sure as we do to include it. But so I think we might want to consider honoring our ancestors by traveling to where we came from, learning about those spaces. And also it brings support, not only for, you know, in terms of the economy of the space, but it also supports people who are on the front line, on the front lines that we should take care of. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Elise. We have 2 hands raised. We are going with Penina, then immediately after with Delphine Yagüe, and then we are going to close the session with final interventions from the panelists. So Penina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Sally. I did read your 10 commandments when they came out on the newsletter that Ruth is publishing. Victor, you see, the subject is very important. You might consider doing something else again, but what I wanted to say was the following. I arrived to Eastern Europe for the first time as soon as the wall came down with a group, 1991. And that's when, for the first time, in a way I was shocked, in a way I wasn't shocked, that all the sites that we visited, i.e. Poland only, and then went to Amsterdam, were managed by non-Jews, literally. We did meet Jews in Poland, but they were not in the position of an administrator, a guide, interpreter, whichever way we call them. And as I said, I was in a way shocked, but on the other side, I wasn't. And since then, I continued my traveling with groups and work in Eastern Europe. And what I came to the conclusion is like this. Number one, I give them great credit for wanting to serve in such a position. Many of them are qualified in the non-Jewish area as historians, geography, whatever they studied. I think your program, Elise, sounds very interesting, but I have a suggestion. I think we have to divide it into two. One should be a general Jewish heritage or traditions and such as this. The other one should be specific to the location, the country, the city, and how did that work? What were the traditions? They should meet people who were from that place, that have stories to tell. Because when I sell or when I speak about a location, it's different. It's also because of my family roots, but it's also because of all the amount of education that I've had and experiences. So I think that that could be a very good program if we can expand it into two sides, so that it shouldn't be a general one. It should be also for the very specific. So let's say I come with a group that definitely is there because of their great-grandfather or even a parent. That's basically the only reason why North Americans or Israelis are coming to Eastern Europe in all the sites that we know, because they want to walk, they want to experience, they want to have that synergy in that city. When I speak to them at the end of our tour, these are the kinds of things that they are saying. So a person who lived there and who knows stories, that does add a lot. You know, I am in Seagate, and whenever I go to the house of Elie Wiesel, it's not just, here is the house, that's where he lived, you know, that kind of thing. Although the guides of the house are excellent, but it's personal touch. So I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Benina. We are going to move with Delphine. Delphine, I just sorry to ask you to be a bit brief because we are running a bit out of time.
Okay, thank you.
Please,
I just wanted to share an experience with you about all what was said, more or less, about to show how we can open to dialogue, and this is the subject for the theme for the next GEC European Days, but also to show how to explain to non-Jewish visitors or locals that Jewish history is part of their own culture, and to cross publics. So I face here in Troyes in France difficulties for local guides to seize the theme of Rashi, and they can't make a tourism valorization for the publics because it's very hard for them to get into the subject. So I have decided since September to create a tourist offer that values both Jewish culture and history and local histories through the writings of Rashi and the Tosafists, and through the whole territory, all the area, and the know-how of partner sites. It means that my objective is to cross different local heritages to boost the offer and animate the route, the Rashi route, while I'm waiting for the construction for future touristic devices that we don't have, or spots that we don't have for the moment, to get tangible animations. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to value all the heritage of the area through thanks to a series of different cultural tours and experiences in Aube County by a dozen thematics such as architecture, nature, wildlife, honey, stained glass window, manuscripts, all kind of heritages that we have here. And their two first guided tours were open on architecture and nature in September for the last GSCPG, and what I've done is through the storytelling around Rashi, I opened all kind of narratives that allows the other heritages, local heritages, to be promoted, but always talking about Jewish culture, Jewish history, languages, and so on, art, and so on. So I try to offer an experimental and creative tourism experience to all kind of publics, Jews and non-Jews, and sometimes they are both together, as said, I don't know who, I don't remember who, but it's very interesting to have people from Jewish and non-Jewish people together, and it's it's really interesting for both kind of publics.
Thank you, Delphine. Actually, yeah, the Rashi route that you are developing, I think it's a highlight it must see, because the initiatives that are around it are I think very revealing in this sense of creating dialogue with this educational approach. Thank you again. Final remarks from the panelists. The last words, Jeremy, Elise, Sally, Ruth.
Just to wish everybody great success in all their work, to thank you for everything that you're doing, and picking up on Elise's term, to heritage, the verb to heritage. So I wish you all well to heritage. That's my, and thank you for your interest in my piece as well.
So thanks to you, Sally. Elise? The micro, Elise.
I should know this by now, right? After, so to pick up, just to add to Sally's thanks. First, Sally, thank you for penning what you penned and continue to pen, please, for all of us. And thank you to AEPJ and to my roundtable colleagues, Victor and Ruth. And we look forward to continuing those conversations as well. It's very lovely to see all of you, some of whom I know, some of whom I've read about, and look forward. We should all be well, and we should return to ability to travel safely very soon. So thank you, Victor, for.
Thank you. No, thanks to you, Elise. Thank you. Thanks to you, Elise. Jeremy.
I mean, two very, very brief comments. One is actually something that a thought that went through my mind, Sally, at the very beginning, which actually came up in a course that I teach with some students on Jewish tourism. Thank goodness we don't do Jewish travel to Mount Sinai. You spoke about Shavuot, that was the context. And I could think of what on earth would happen if we went to Mount Sinai, what a belittling experience it would be to have to kind of interpret the site and to know where the toilets are and the catering. So I say it because this is a very kind of difficult kind of experience, and the greater the site, in some ways, the harder the way it is to get in there. And I feel okay saying this because I think Delphine has heard me say this before, but coming in after what Delphine said, given the fact there's so little tangible heritage around Troyes to be able to talk about Rashi, but Rashi is absolutely the most kind of, out there piece of Jewish heritage that we have. So it's a kind of an interesting question about where we are. So anyway, it's a thought that went through my mind. I mean, the main thing I want to say, which is really for me at the end of these days of this incubator, is just an incredible sense of excitement. I feel that, we've so much more has happened. And, I think back to, when I was a student at university studying Jewish history, and Ruth was writing what she was doing and doing the pioneer work that she was doing. And I couldn't believe that she was unveiling this opportunity that people had to go and see this stuff. And now I look at where we are now, and I look at this incubator and what essentially, Victor, what you and the whole team around you have kind of drawn us into. It just feels very exciting. It actually feels kind of a historical moment. So it's an exciting moment, and it's a thanks to my panelists and my whatever, to the people who came. But obviously, more than anything else, it's a thank to Victor and obviously Federica and everyone else who's been involved.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Very touching words. Ruth.
I don't have much more to add to any of this, except that we're looking forward to taking this show on the road and continuing the conversation. I think we could go on for hours. I know that whenever I see Helise or Victor, we end up, Victor, didn't we like close a cafe or something? Like, I can't even remember where we were, but we started talking and they kicked us out because it was hours later and we were still talking and they wanted to close. So right. the three of us with different guests each time are planning to take the show on the road and to continue these conversations and to go deeper and deeper into the issues that Sally brought up in her 10 Commandments. And so we look forward to seeing you all. We look forward to finding venues. So if anybody wants to bring us Zoom-like, if you have a museum or a program or something like that, we'd be very happy to accommodate. And if you have suggestions or want, you know, of who can be a guest to take part, we're also open to that. And we look forward to being in touch with everybody. This was fun.
Thank you, Ruth. I would like to say a special thanks to all the panelists, to Jeremy, Elise, Ruth, and Sally. I think, Sally, that we take the commitment to follow this commandment. So that's, I think, something that we are going to remember. I would like also to take this opportunity to thank all the guests that joined us today. Also to all the participants of the incubators and all the route managers that have been working these last 2 days in a very, very intense way. I share the excitement of Jeremy. I think that there's ways to do, ways to improve, and so much field to explore together in cooperation. Also, I would like to thank Federico, that was in charge of all the technical aspects of this conversation. Federica, the project manager of the European Route of Jewish Heritage. And last but not least, I would like also to thank the members of the board of the APJ that have been with us during all the incubator, including this last session. Annie Sacerdoti, Asunción, the General Secretary, Claude Bloch, our honorary president. It was a pleasure to moderate this session. As Ruth was saying and Elise was saying, we are going to continue and giving continuity to this conversation. So thanks also Sally for inviting us to debate and reflect together. Having said that, thank you again. We are all going to keep in contact. We are here, I think, more than 40 people, all a kind of the family of the Jewish heritage in Europe. So it will be fantastic to continue working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Stay healthy, stay strong.